Welcome, everyone. This is Fathoms Deep, a Black Sales podcast. I'm Daphne Olive, and I am so sad to say that Elizabeth cannot be here this time because of the technical problems that just love to plague us when we have interviews. The good news is that I am about to chat with our captain. Toby Stevens is here with me. Welcome, Toby.
It's good to be here, Daphne.
So nice to have you. We certainly waited a long time. And it was totally
I know. Well, I'm sorry it's been such a long wait. I hope the wait is worth it. That's all.
Well, you're okay. So yeah, these listeners have no idea that this is happening, which is fun. I'm so happy to be surprising them with this. And I thought we could just start actually talking about them a little bit. I just wanted to tell you that, so we've been doing this podcast for, I should know, I think 2.5 years. Yeah. And we had an amazing experience the whole time of that listeners have corresponded with us in so many different ways, and through email and through Twitter and calling us and all these things. And one of the really amazing parts of what we've been able to do is that we have been a place where people talk about how meaningful this story is for them. Mm. And in particular, Flint. And I just wanted, first of all, to tell you, they're just, your portrayal of this character has been so meaningful to so many people. And I was curious, what aspects of Flint are, I don't know, have stuck with you or had been particularly meaningful for you?
Well, firstly, I want to say that I'm incredibly moved and touched that people have, that this series has meant so much to so many people. And, I've felt that, I've recently I did a play in London, and, after each performance, I'd come out of the stage door and there would be generally, about 10 or 11 people waiting, all of whom were, had very personal reactions to the show. I found that incredibly touching, and a lot of them, and also slightly overwhelming, because a lot of people were saying, he taught me so much about myself, and, he really helped me come to terms with who I am and my sexuality and all of these things. And, I'm an actor, I'm an avatar for this character. And of course, there's a lot of me in him, but there's also a huge amount of John Steinberg. And it's incredibly touching, but also slightly, as I say, overwhelming, because I'm like, well, look, I was just doing my job. That's what I do. I mean, I was incredibly lucky to be cast in the part. And it is one of those things where he very much became part of my life for 5 years, and that was a wonderful journey, but it was also pretty harrowing at times for me. And that sounds so pretentious when actors go, oh, it was so draining. And
dude, we saw your face in 410. We saw how drained you were.
I look like I'm about 70 years old. I mean, and I mean, it really did. And I was carrying that part around with me for 5 years. And my life was, it was both brilliant as an acting experience, but it did take a toll on me. So the whole process was an extraordinary journey. And I remember, standing on the set and at times and looking around me with all the great people I was working with. I mean, it was a fantastic family, and I loved every single person on that set. It just really was such a wonderful group. And I just went, this will never happen to me again. This is probably the apex of my career in a way, because just the scale of it, the quality of it, the writing, The camaraderie, and it was very difficult for me to say goodbye to it. At the same time, I was relieved to say goodbye to him as well. But anyway, this isn't really answering your question. It's just,
but I would have come back to it.
I feel incredibly touched that people have had such a response to it, and it makes it all the more worthwhile that we went through all of that stuff, because, when you're making great quality stuff, it shouldn't be easy,
Yeah.
Anyway, what was your question? Meandered
okay.
around for like
I
20
could
minutes.
spend 2 hours of the beauty of the show as a whole, but yes, let's talk about this marriage between you and John Steinberg. What aspects of the character that came out of it were meaning for you personally?
Well, I suppose so when I first spoke with John all those years ago, and he basically told me the backstory. And it was before I was about to test for it. And he said, look, I have to let you know, this is basically what the character is. And I just remember going, what a fantastic idea, to have this, this sort of totemic figure that, like, masculine, kind of like, enigmatic, charismatic, all of these things, and then literally do, reveal the fact that all of that is just, you've only been seeing the surface of this person. Right. And then underneath that, there's a whole other, there are layers and layers and layers of this person. And that's what I loved about the fact that it was like an unpeeling of this man. And he was a mystery. He was a mystery to everyone. He's a mystery to the audience. He's a mystery to himself. Anyway, I just thought it was such a great idea. And then, I came on board, and I loved initially playing that part. I'd always wanted to play one of those kind of, spaghetti western Clint Eastwood characters where they are I love movie stars who can, like someone like Clint Eastwood, who do very little. In fact, they do very little, but yet they do an enormous amount. And it's really hard doing what they do. It just actually, you're present, but yet you are not informing anybody about what is going on inside your head. That there's just these, you can see in the eyes that there is something going on. There's something going on, but you're constantly going, what is it? What is he thinking? What's his attitude to this person? And I really enjoyed in the first season playing that, because I knew what the payoff would be. And I think it frustrated the audience to a certain amount, but I found that gratifying, because it was like, well, great. I'm glad you're guessing what his motivations are and what's going on inside his head. And then as he kind of there was this sort of revelation in the second season about his past. And you kind of go, oh, well, now we know who he is, and now we can kind of, we know where he's going and what his motivations are. But then it keeps on going. You keep on going, why did you do that? And why are you doing this? And why do you, and I love the fact that there's just these, Steinberg is a master of wrong-footing audiences and not giving them what they want in a way. Yeah. At the same time, kind of giving them he doesn't give them what they want. He gives them what they really want, or what the story really requires to keep going and to have the kind of depth that it eventually had.
Yeah, I made that joke after season 3 when everyone kept hinting to us about Silver's backstory, or what we were going to. Yeah. And that's what I kept joking to John about, was that he was basically doing to all of us what he did to the characters, that the characters would get what they thought they wanted, but it turned out that it wasn't at all what they wanted, and then they would learn something.
Yes, which is great, which is in all great literature, actually. Mm-hmm. And I always felt that John was actually writing it was literature, really, what we were doing. I mean, once we'd broken away from the initial kind of sort of the gratuitous kind of, sex and kind of all that stuff, which I think was more of a kind of stars. It was a stars imperative.
You mean the really, really, really depressing sex in season?
Yes, yeah.
We have spoken with Louise.
Yes. No, but there was a lot of kind of, there was a lot of that going on, and it was a lot of kind of. I think that was that once it had moved away from that, and John was allowed to do what he does. I think it just got better and better and better and better and better. Yeah.
I agree. All right, Toby. So since you got just half of the Fathoms Deep crew, and I apologize, you actually got the nerdy half, not the fun half.
Well, I don't know the difference, so you're very,
awesome.
As far as I can tell, you're charming.
Well, thank you.
I'm sure Liz is even more charming.
Liz is, in fact, more charming than I am, but you're stuck
Impossible.
with me.
Impossible.
All right, shush you. Oh, I got to order the captain around. Liz wanted to talk specifically about one scene that we have focused on, and this is like ancient history for you, but we've always talked about as you were talking about Flint being the mystery he is in season 1, we have always focused on the scene where Flint kills Gates and how it's not exactly a litmus test, but it almost ends up being this threshold for viewers that you have this man that you kind of love and identify with, but that's a very uncomfortable place to be. And then the show takes it so much farther that at the moment when Flint is killing the most sympathetic character is the moment up until that point where we all love Flint the most, like have the most empathy for Flint. So she just wanted to ask about what you were doing in that scene and like how it felt for you. And
well, I think that scene encapsulates Flint's journey in the entire season, in the entire series. I mean, that is Flint because he loves Gates, and yet he is so driven by his inner journey, his inner. It's a monomania which he can't escape from, which is basically he has to revenge himself. He needs catharsis with England. He needs revenge. He needs to exact that. And so that is above anything else. That drives him beyond anything else. And it is something that is so deep within him. It's not even about Thomas, really. It's deep within his psyche. And it's something that it's about the fact, it all goes back to the fact, for me anyway, it was the fact that he had a rather like, I suppose, similar to Breaking Bad with that character, Walter White. There's this ego inside that cannot cope with the fact that he came from nothing, and yet he has this genius, which is he's a brilliant leader. He's a brilliant naval captain. He would have made a brilliant admiral. He would have gone up, 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 and they took it all away from him. And he cannot cope with that. That is that humiliation of having it all taken away from him. And not only that, but the only person he's ever really loved and found himself through is taken away as well. And that anger is something that it is the thing that fuels him utterly. And the damage, so it's a conflation of the fact that they took Thomas away from him. But underneath all of that, it's the fact that they humiliated him and they took away everything from him. And so that monomania of exacting revenge on England is how he defines himself. That's how he's become to define himself. And he sacrificed everything in that journey. I mean, he went to Nassau. They left everything behind. He started this pirate life, which he really is not him. It's a guise. It's not him. It's not who he is.
It's a coat that he wears.
Yeah, and he's having to lower himself to kind of he's dealt with it. He's come up slowly through the naval ranks from nothing, which would have been an incredibly difficult thing for him to do. And now he's gone back and he's working with all these slovenly kind of, people, amoral, they're not really that skilled. He's having to make them skilled. He's having to drag them along. He's having to kind of Gates is somebody he bonds with, and he actually, ends up really liking and admiring. But in the end, the fact that Gates is going to blow the whole plan. He's going to take everything. He's going to take it away from him. And when it comes down to it, he has to kill him. He has to kill him because it's his only way to continue. And what I love about the way John wrote Black Sails, but Flint particularly, is that they're always in the moment going strategy. He's always 10 moves ahead. And in that moment, he's, it's what is he thinking? He's thinking 10 moves ahead. He's going, what are my options? How do I get out of this? He's strategizing. And that's his genius. That's why he's such a brilliant character, and why he would have been such a brilliant admiral or Lord Admiral or whatever he would have achieved, because he's better than anybody at it. And in that moment, he knows, this is how I'm going to do. This is how I have to kill him. Then I have to do, and I have to take that risk. One of the things I really love about great writing, I remember years and years ago, I did a Shakespeare play, Coriolanus, which is a phenomenal, one of his Roman plays. And Coriolanus is this incredible character who is basically this athlete that Rome has produced. He's this master warrior. He's the best on the battlefield. He's a genius in battle. And then they want to make him a politician, right? And he's just not capable of it. He's a warrior. He's not a politician. But they try and make him a politician. All of the kind of, the people in power, because they love this guy, they think, oh, he's going to be brilliant. And they create this monster. But the thing is, it's not Coriolanus's fault. It's Rome's fault for doing it. What I think is the potential that he could have had. So if Rome hadn't done that to Coriolanus, would he have become a great leader in time? Because he had all the ingredients of doing it. And the thing is, I think the same thing about Flint. If the whole thing with Thomas had not been uncovered, if he hadn't met Thomas or whatever, he might have become a great, great man. So what is the potential of this person in in other circumstances? And I always think that's an interesting thing to extrapolate out, certainly as an actor, go, what could have happened? And in the second season, when we were doing all of that stuff, I'm going, what is he losing? What has he lost? And what has the world lost because of that? And the thing is, I think that, yes, his sexuality is a huge part of the story and of Flint. But, and it was a very important part of why I wanted to play the part and, what Flint is about. But I don't think it's all about that. I think that there is also the fact that he lost this career and it was taken away from him.
And Thomas brought that up almost immediately and said to Flint, I people are going to, I used to be able to like recall lines out of nowhere. I lost that ability. But Thomas said that like you are better read than like half the men I knew who in school, and that you have this amazing career ahead of you. Why are you talking to me? Like he implied I'm about to take you down a road that would be very dangerous for your career.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important for people also to remember about him is that he comes from very humble origins. And in history, there are these people who come from nowhere. They have such skill, and such natural instinctive ability that they end up, bubbling up to the surface. And he's one of those people who's making his way up to the surface, but he gets diverted by this terrible thing. And so, the thing is, I think that always sticks with Flint is the fact that he was on this journey that would have taken him to the top and really fulfilled that side of his life, as well as his sexuality. Mm-hmm. It was all taken away from him. And then he cannot let that go. And so when he kills Gates, it's like, and that's why I think it's, when you find everything out about him in the second season, looking back at season 1, you go, oh, I totally get it. Yeah. I totally get the fact he had to kill him.
And it goes both ways, because like we said, like that moment when he kills Gates, you're so invested in whatever it is that's motivating him. Like as a viewer, you don't yet know what it is, but you're so invested that then when you get the backstory, it's like you're so in already. You're dying to know.
Yeah.
What is
well, it was hilarious. I mean, it has to be. I have to talk about the fact when it was revealed, the furore that went on. I mean, like I remember, I just started doing Twitter. I'm useless at it. I sort of, it's like kind of
Toby. But I follow you on Twitter. You are excellent on Twitter.
What I found so hilarious was there was just all of these guys, going, oh my God, what have you done? You've taken away my hero and all this stuff. You ruined him, And they were just so petulant about the whole thing, as if they had ownership of this character, and as if, that was going to alter.
As if they had ownership of masculinity.
Yeah, exactly. And also like, so that means you dislike this character now. Oh, I'm not going to watch this shit anymore, man. You've just ruined And then, it was so funny because there were a lot of them.
I like your American bro accent. That's really great.
Dude, wait. But then it was hilarious because I watched certain people turn around and actually they came back. They said, I'm not watching this anymore. But then they did watch it. Mm-hmm. And then they couldn't help themselves. But by the end of the scene, they're like, he may be gay, but I still love this guy, And like, you're going, well, look, I'm glad that it actually challenged people. It really did. It challenged a lot of guys, and they actually ended up getting over that. Mm-hmm. And I kind of think, well, that's quite cool, because they started seeing him for who he really was, rather than this
image that they had.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, because he's Flint and he's queer as hell, but they just never realized that somebody could be those two things at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. But it caused me great amusement when that was all going on. But I also, going back to the Gates thing just very quickly, because I just actually realized I didn't finish it off. So that basically encapsulates everything about Flint. That moment when he kills Gates is what goes all the way through to the end of season 4, when he's with Silver, and Silver says to him, "You will not stop. You cannot stop."
Right.
It's like an intervention with somebody. It's that intervention going, you can't, you're never going to give this up, and you're going to drag us all down with you. And, I have to stop you. But it's the same thing in Flint's eyes. It's the same thing of like, this is me. It has become me. It is everything that defines me. It's no longer about my sexuality. It's no longer about anything to do with those things. It's now, this is me. And that's in a way, that ending of Gates is really encapsulates, really what Flint is, what Flint becomes, what he is.
And of course, we have the mirroring of the language of "this is not what I wanted."
Yeah. I mean, it's that thing. I mean, I think in a way, it's quite a good analogy of an addict who just cannot. He can't stop. He can't stop. And the whole thing that he's become this kind of warped image of what he was, of this genius strategist whose brain just never stops. And it's churning in this direction that is just about destruction. And it's just got this nihilistic end game that is like, I will just carry on. And it doesn't negate the fact that he's still a human being, but it is
or that a lot of his analysis is correct of culture
absolutely.
And shame and all.
But that's going back to Coriolanus. There's a wonderful speech which he has in that thing, because the reason I'm going back to him is he is another character that is equally attractive as he is repulsive. So there's this one thing. The thing about Coriolanus is that his political analysis is absolutely truthful.
Right.
He cannot. The thing about Coriolanus, he cannot lie. So his political analysis is totally truthful, which is when he's asked to beg for people's votes and he can't stoop to do it, he actually unleashes this speech where he goes, "Why are you bothering asking what people want? Just tell them what they want, because the people don't know. You'll say one thing, they'll agree with you. They say another, they'll agree with that. They have no mind of their own, and they are also ignorant."
I never thought about that. It is so Flint.
and it's such a connection for me, because he goes, they're ignorant, they don't know, do not trust them. And of course, it's totally true. But at the same time, it's repellent, because that is about dictatorship.
Right.
And it's anti-democratic. But yet there is a truth to what he's saying, even though it's really difficult for us to deal with, and so the duality of those two things, I think, is very much part of it. It's part of Flint. There's this thing of like, he does say things that are very true and very and are very honest as well,
and even enlightened.
And really enlightened, yeah. I mean, he's a really intelligent, as well as having this, other side, which is, I think it's just good writing.
So I think that I'm starting to think, like, this was going to question, but now I'm going to frame this as a statement. I think that maybe you and I see season 4 Flint differently. My question was going to be, I mean, again, I have questions for each season, but we had felt like when we were doing our analysis of season 4 was that Flint had reached a more peaceful place, like a place, and one of my questions is going to be why you think that happened, but it's sounding like maybe you don't think that happened. Our analysis of Flint was that he had reached a place of more peace and a slightly more detached way of looking at his analysis of the world.
Yeah, but I think you're right in a way. The only reason he has that is because of Silver.
Right.
So Silver is sharing Silver has become a partner. And in a way, Flint operates where he always needs a partner. And, whether it's Gates, Thomas, whatever, he needs Silver. And and he becomes the person who he respects as well, in terms of he can strategize. He is learning how to. He's clever, Silver.
He knows Flint's story.
Yeah, and he knows about it. Yeah, exactly. So and also he's not bothered by it. You know, he's not like, oh my God, you know. So I think that's what allows Flint to go, you know, I can sit back on this slightly. I have somebody who is my partner, and we're working towards the same goal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only when that starts falling apart,
right,
that you get this, you know, you see what's really driving it.
It makes Flint do the best speech of all speeches. Like, clearly it just needed to fall apart so we could have that speech.
Well, yeah. But then you see the wonderful thing about that speech at the end. I assume you're talking about the one right at the end.
Yeah, 410. We have dubbed it the dragon speech.
But the great thing about that is it really just shows Flint's duality, where he's wrong and he's right at the same time.
Well, as is Silver.
And yeah, exactly. And it is impossible to move forward from there.
John said, I was just re-listening to our episodes with John. John said that it was the point at which they were never connected, which is really interesting.
Well, it's the realization.
Right.
And that's an appalling realization, because, and also we're always, at the end, we're always betrayed by, you know, there is that thing of, it's never enough, and it can never be enough. And they do, although they have such similarities, they also totally diverge.
Exactly.
And so.
Okay, so maybe I'm going to take this to the divergent place. It's funny, like we, in the podcast, in particular me, I must admit, have obsessively watched the show and like tracked where certain phrases and words come up over and over again. And one of them is mattering. And it was interesting because I've always been very focused on that. And then just recently, one of our listeners, I'm going to name her because I really appreciate her bringing this up right before we're talking. Her name is Elaine Chalk. Hi, Elaine.
Yeah. Hello, Elaine.
So the idea of mattering is something that I believe came up the first time for real in season 2, when Flint needed to change the focus from getting the gold to no longer getting the gold.
Yeah.
And that was the word that kind of triggered Silver in a way to like go do a thing that I don't think Silver intended to do, which is stay with the crew. And so this like concept went through the whole show from that point. And what we were talking about was that it almost felt like maybe both Silver and Flint thought that they understood mattering as a concept the same way as each other, but they were actually completely misunderstanding each other. And then that word comes up again at the end. And the idea that, like, for Flint, mattering is, like, big and epic and historic and, like, how we're changing the world, or, as you would put it, maybe how the world dealt with him.
Yeah.
And for Silver, mattering is more of an interpersonal thing. Like that mattering for him is about individual relationships or relationship with the crew. Like, because Silver never cared about history or culture or society.
I suppose, you know, it is true. But also I would say that it means the same thing to both of them in a way, in that mattering means that you have worth, and that you have something that is needed and required. So you have a talent, you have an ability that makes you valuable, not only to, you know, your friends or whatever, but you have a worth in your skill. And that, you know, I think Silver obviously is comparative to Flint in that they both come from nowhere. They both come from these, these mysterious but obscure backgrounds. But the thing is, Silver, although he's lost his leg, has not lost what Flint has lost. So therefore, the thing is, Flint mattered because he had managed to crawl his way up through sheer skill and ability into the Navy to a certain rank where he was, he would have advanced, hopefully, and probably had ambitions to do so. And that was taken away from him in the way that it was. Now, Silver doesn't have that. He hasn't had that loss, that sense of wrong, that sense of... So that is where I think they diverge, because he doesn't have Flint's obsessive hurt, anger, pain that drives him on, that just becomes Flint. Flint becomes that. I mean, it's quite a good name for him in a way, even though it's a
it was a handed down name. Yeah,
he becomes
Flinty,
and yeah, sharp edge, hard, relentless, But Silver has this. He can see he doesn't have that inner kind of, maybe later on when he's this sort of sad cook with, maybe he feels that loss and that pain and that kind of, which drives him onto, Treasure Island. But at that point, they do understand matter in a similar way, but one has this loss, this pain, this anger, and the other one doesn't really have that. He has love. He has his love. He has, so he has everything to live for. Flint doesn't have anything to live for. He's just become, he embodies his whole kind of, and so I think they understand. I think matter starts out, they both understand each other, but then it becomes something, again, they diverge. Mm-hmm. They go away from one another. But that is something that bonds them at a point. That there is that point. Because Flint goes, even though I've been humbled, I matter to these people because they need me. But at the same time, he knows that they fucking hate him. They fucking hate Flint. But they need him because he's the best. If they were with other, captains, the other captains haven't got an iota, any of the skill.
But other captains wouldn't have led them down these crazy roads.
And also, going, when do we get paid?
Exactly.
I think got all these slaves helping us, but when do we get paid?
Flint matters to them in Flint's mind.
I love it.
Flint is positive that he matters to them, possibly in ways that he doesn't actually.
Yeah, exactly.
But so this brings me to Andrew's question. One of our contributors, Andrew Dice, who writes for Screen Rant, his question was when Flint loses people. A lot of his major moments in the course of the part of the story that we see have to do with Flint sometimes killing them himself, but a lot of loss. And and each loss feels like kind of takes him in a slightly new version of his direction. And so Andrew's question was to what extent is Flint motivated either overall or in different parts by loss, meaning he has nothing to lose, and or him being motivated by some sense of obligation to those he lost, obligation to Thomas to continue his project, or obligation to Miranda because she basically died because of him.
Well, there's a point where, I think that is true. I think there is a point in season 2 where he actually does. There's a possibility of him taking another course, which is the idea that his and Thomas's legacy will be fulfilled through this, and that's an opportunity. Maybe this is the best way to go, and I can give this up. I can give it up, and I can, And then Miranda is killed. And I think Miranda is she controls him. She can talk to him. She can reason with him. She can soothe him. And she is a connection to Thomas. She's a connection to that life that they had. And a better world where it is, you know, it has this openness and the possibilities, you know, and then she is killed in this horrendous way, and that cuts it all. That's just like boom, and it's all gone. And that's a very important point that you make, because it is a pivotal point where he is kind of, though he's still malleable, plastic enough to actually adapt and become somebody else, you know? And
Right.
that is the point where that's gone. It's all gone.
I always feel like there's no way for him to look at Miranda and not see James McGraw still.
Yeah. And the fact that they have this, you know, I
mean,
love
also she's amazing, and everyone should listen to her all the time. There is that as well.
and she is this, and she is this kind of, they have this wonderful partnership. They really do. And in the worst circumstances, they've lived this life together, and they've managed to kind of, you know, she is this, and what they have together is this kind of oasis in this pirate world, where there isn't that kind of cultivated, you know, culture where he can go, and, you know, and it's so important to, it's such a big part of him. Do you know what I mean? It's up until that point where she gets killed, that is you know, reading the life of the mind and the kind of the beauty of objects, of music, whatever, poetry. I mean, I think he was into all of that stuff, and they were, you know, he had an open mind to all of that. And then suddenly it's like, bam, it's all gone.
Yeah.
And then he goes into this tunnel. And I mean, I think the thing is, like, it's like, once those things are taken away from you, what the fuck is there left, you know? And so I think the thing is that until Silver comes along, until he finds this weird relationship with him, I think season 3 is this nihilistic fucking, he goes, and it literally is his state of mind. The whole season, with the fucking hurricane, all of that stuff, is kind of his state of mind. And I think that, for me, is my personal favorite season, because I just thought the writing was such an incredible standard. Yeah. And just his journey was just so kind of
elemental.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is so great. I mean, and all the choices we made, you know, everybody got upset that I shaved my hair, but I mean, it was just so right, because I mean, so it's good. Just like, who the fuck is this guy? Yeah. I mean, he's like, you know, suddenly he turns up and he's just looking like he's dead inside. And I love that at the beginning, the opening, where he goes in to Nevis and shoots the guy, and he shoots the guy, and he shoots the wife in the head. And it's just like, you go, okay, here we go. This is like,
things are crazy now.
You know,
yep.
It's Flint unplugged, you know, and it's just, I just love that whole story.
It's an amazing flipping of the introduction to Flint also, because you again have the unmasking, like you did the whole thing with the headdress and the unmasking in the cold open of season 1, of the first episode of season 1, which I love that cold open, because it's like, hey, we're going to take all the expectations you ever had about what pirates are, and we're going to like do this thing where they're really scary, and then this big dude comes in with his sword, and then this other guy that you assume is not Flint stops him, and then unmasks himself like, hi, I'm actually, you know, it's me. I'm not as scary. I'm not as scary as what you always imagine pirates would be, except actually later I'll show you that I am. So I love that, like, the beginning of season 3 is kind of like, and you thought I was capable of scary up to this point. Let me remind you of that whole thing of wearing a headdress and be like, even more scary than you've ever seen me. So good. I love it.
Yeah.
And again, just like you were said, like one of my favorite things about the show all the time is that it like lets you settle into being comfortable, thinking you know what's going on. And then it subverts it always, but not in a way that doesn't feel cohesive with the story. Like always in a way that makes you start questioning yourself, which is much more interesting.
And also I love the fact that they're constantly having to troubleshoot. Mm-hmm. They troubleshoot the shit out of everything. I mean, everything goes wrong, and they're constantly going, okay, what do we do now? What do we do now? What do we do now? And it's constantly wrong footing, not only the audience, but the actors. You know, it's like, you know.
Oh, good. I'm glad that you all had that experience as well.
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, what was great was, I felt that even though I had ownership of that character with me and John both had kind of, and I'd earned some ownership of him. Mm-hmm. I couldn't, even though I had ownership, I couldn't change what was coming around the corner.
Right.
Just like we have our own, you can't change what happens tomorrow. Nope. You can't predict it. You can't know what's going to happen. And I kind of liked the fact that went on.
That's really neat. Yes, we can't ignore our backstories.
Yes.
Nor can we control where they take us all the time.
Well, I mean, it's fantastic because you only have the moment in which you're in. Because you have your past, your memories shape you and what you are, but you only live in the present. You can't predict the future. You can't tell what's going to happen. So that's exactly what they're doing, is they're living totally in the moment. Yeah. Flint is, but his great thing is he has this fucking massive, frontal cortex, which is constantly going, I need to survive, I need to survive, I need to survive. And I need to do this thing, and how is that going to be fulfilled? And it's that constant itch deep inside of him of wanting that revenge and wanting to be there, present when it comes to its fruition. Mm-hmm. But even beyond that, that it's never going to be enough.
Right. The thing that's neat about the last season is it does start to feel so close. Like it feels like they could almost do it. And part of my mind's like, I know history. I know they weren't super true to history, but like they can't completely change history.
What also I love about it is it's sort of like a precursor to the American Revolution.
Absolutely.
It is. It's like he was there before. He was going, we can do this. We don't need, we can shrug off this, and, of course, he's so right. He's so right. And it's such an amazing, if they did that, what an incredible thing. But at the same time, his motivation is so screwed. And what is the price of this?
But do we think that revolutions always necessarily happen for the perfect reasons that we would want them to happen?
No, absolutely.
That's definitely not how humans work.
Yeah. Well, look, all of the revolutions are messy and costly.
Right.
Yeah. And
that's what Silver's saying.
The cost is appalling.
Right. I mean, honestly, you are harsher on Flint than I am. I'm now seeing. And I'm pretty harsh on Flint, I think, relative to a lot of the fans. But
in what way do you think
I definitely give him better motivations sometimes than what it sounds like you do. And one of my questions is going to be like, how do you think of meeting the Queen and Maddie and being exposed? I mean, not that he didn't know about slavery, but like seeing this model of this community that had been enslaved. For me, it felt like that was a moment when Flint went from being just like super in his head and like, this is all about me, this is all about me. And the speech that he gave to the Queen obviously served his purposes, and he needed to do that. But I think that it felt to me like on some level he had convinced himself as well that there was actually a place where he started to recognize a larger world of subjugation.
I think there's no. Why
it's not an either or.
Exclusive?
Right.
Why are they mutually exclusive? Because I think
you're right. They're not.
I think no, I mean he does. I think he totally goes. Look, I think he is somebody who is open-minded enough and savvy enough to realize that this is appalling.
Mm-hmm.
Slavery is. I think he is totally against it. I think he finds it. I think he finds it absolutely repellent. And I think he is. Look, if I can incorporate these people, if I can liberate them at the same time as sticking it to these bastards who fucking made this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's even better. That's even better. I can really, and he's clever enough to kind of go, absolutely, this is the right way to go. And they are useful to me, but at the same time, I love the fact that I can do this as well.
Right.
You know, I can do this as well. And I don't think, it's also that thing of like, I don't think if you said to Flint at any point, are you just a monomaniacal psychopath who just has one fixated idea that is totally about your own, you know, to do with your own ego? He would go, no, absolutely not. I am trying to do something for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I am trying to liberate everyone from this yoke of, you know, of mismanagement and rule and, you know, and moral kind of, there's this lid of morality that they put on because they feel that they are, you know, that they're better than everybody else and all of this stuff. But I think that at the same time, that is about his own kind of like what happened to him.
Right.
What happened to me? You know, you judged me. You threw me out, and I was of use. I was of worth. I mattered, and you threw me off like some, you know, and the anger about that. But that is to do with his ego. But at the same time, I think it doesn't kind of like, that anger and that resentment doesn't manifest itself to him in his own mental landscape as this kind of like totally self-serving, selfish, nihilistic thing. I think he sees himself as messianic in a way of trying, look, I can give you such a better life. I can free you from this if you just trust me and let me get to that point where I can do it, you know.
Yep. Just trust me.
So I'm not, yeah, exactly. Just trust me. I can do it. And so I'm not, it's like, you know, again, like the addict, just, you know, they'll do anything to, you know, they can't see themselves just as a pure addict, that they're just some sort of horrible, you know, and to a certain extent, people are more than just their addiction, but yet that is what, at the core of them, what drives them on, is that addiction, you know. So I'm not totally, you know, I'm not as hard on him as I think.
As I just said you were.
No, yeah.
No, obviously you care for him because you portrayed him so beautifully. I did want to say one thing. You had said something about him and Miranda, and it was interesting. I want to say this partly for the listeners, but also to hear if you have anything to say about it. I had just been talking to Louise about your first scene together at the beginning of episode 2 of season 1, where Miranda's bandaging Flint. And I asked her about that because I was writing about it. But what I had to say to her about it was that scene is such a beautiful expression of the partnership that you had said that they had. And she said that was your first scene together, which is kind of amazing because you two, I know that you're both very good actors. I'm not trying to say, oh my God, it's amazing you did acting. But the level of intimacy between the two of you in that scene was fabulous, and I had not realized that was your first scene together.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the thing is also it's also, I got on incredibly. I mean, you know,
she's fabulous.
Louise is fantastic. She's a fantastic actress, but she's also a wonderful person, and we really hit it off together. And I have an enormous amount of admiration for her, and I'm extremely fond of her and Nick, of course, who's also in the series, her husband. They're wonderful people, and they're just very easy. I found it very easy to chime in with her. You know, you get that with certain people. you just can hit a level where you just go, okay, I feel safe with you, and they feel safe with you, and so you just have that, and we had that very early on, and also I knew that storyline was really mattered, but it was so sort of open to play with because you didn't really know we kind of knew where they came from and all that stuff, but it was sort of open. You could define what they were and what their relationship was to a certain extent. The writing was there, but you could also you could create your own kind of embroidery, as it were, for their relationship, and that was really fun.
Yeah, and you two did it straight off, which in hindsight was, I think, so important that you really did, just like in the way your bodies moved and the way you looked at each other. It was just, we needed to know in that episode how important these people were to each other, even though we had no idea why.
Yeah, it was and also I love that thing in that season where he has the speech about taking the oar and going inland.
Yes,
and
that was in my next question.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Well, go on.
No. Tell me your thoughts about that.
Well, no, that there is a kind of fantasy in Flint's mind of when he is done, of just disappearing and going somewhere where he can just be. That somehow that will be his, achieving what he wants to achieve will free him, and he can go somewhere and just stop. And there is, I think in season 4, there's a moment with Silver where he goes, look, once we've done this, you'll take over.
Right.
You and Marty will take over, and I'm just going to go away. I'm just going to, I'm done.
He wants to go away a lot. He talks about it in season 2, where he's like, Flint's going to get the hell out of here.
Yeah. But in a way, without being too depressing, I think that's almost like sort of death. It's like death for him. It's like, I just want to stop.
He just wants to rest.
Yeah, I want to stop. Yeah. Anyway.
Oh, that's really interesting. In my writing, I've been talking all season 1 about this structure, about sea and land, and how the different characters relate to each of those geographical ideas.
Yeah.
Don't need to get into that right now. That's a lot. But I basically ended up surprising myself by making the argument that Flint uses that speech, and I think on some level really believes it, but some part of him, and I think it's the revenge part, doesn't, is kind of working against it at the same time, the whole time.
Yeah, I think it's a fantasy of like, when this is over, I'm just going to kind of put my slippers on and open a good book and smoke a pipe by the fire.
But he's not really that guy.
No.
He's not that guy at all.
But we all have those fantasies where we kind of, but the thing is, when you attain them, they're not what you want.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? That's part of what having fantasies or wishes or whatever. They're things that sort of drive us forward. But when you achieve them, they're not enough, or they're not what you really wanted, and then it morphs into something else, and the journey never really ends. But
like Miranda said, he's fighting for the sake of fighting, that he's now stuck in that cycle. And yeah, I definitely have the theory that he keeps talking about this thing he wants, and that he keeps, in theory, working towards it, but also kind of undermining it constantly. Yeah. And right after he did that speech, just 3 episodes later, we finally see Flint captaining when they're going after Bryson, and Flint seems miserable up until that point, and then suddenly he is, exactly. Oh yeah, that was one of my questions I didn't write down. I wanted to talk about that. It is stunning watching Flint captain, watching the physicality of I think I just wrote something like that about how he and his ship almost become like physical extensions of each other. And you
Yeah.
have that especially in 105 as this contrast to Bryson, who's just like writing stuff and drinking tea and giving orders, and then you've got Flint just like being part of his ship.
Yes, yeah.
And then you get that again during the Storm episode where it's even more so.
Where, yeah. I mean,
Where Flint's like part of the ship and part of the storm and part of like Flint it's almost like Flint's at the center of this chaos that he's creating and mitigating at the same time.
Yeah. It's so, yeah. I mean, I mean, I think that's very true. I think he is so instinctive. It is him that's what I mean about he's such a natural commander, and he's such a talented sailor, and you know it's him. That's where he is expressing himself purely, is when he's in charge, when he's doing all of that stuff. That's what he was made to do. And the tragedy for him is that it was never fulfilled in the way that it could have been. But in a way, it's fulfilled in a better way, because he's like, well, at least he's not working for England. Which is like, he's not off kind of, yeah, exactly. It ends up being this more epic.
Right.
Kind of.
I think you do. It is almost like you get a hint in season 2 of the thing Flint tells Silver would happen to him. Like when Flint brings Thomas to the place to see the hanging, and he's like, look at all of them. Like, I feel like maybe on some level of Flint had spent McGraw had spent his whole life in service of that world. That might have ended up feeling unsatisfying to him. Like, because, he could rise in the ranks, but he did have some spark in himself of idealism that I think Thomas gave him a direction to take that. But I feel like a huge part of what was attractive to James about Thomas was the idealism. Yeah,
and also the I think there is a purity which he's seduced by. I don't think he's naturally somebody. I think he's quite cynical.
He is, but cynical people usually are just dying to have something to believe in.
And I think also the fact that there was a different morality. There was a world in which people could have these complex relationships and it would be fine, and sexuality was not an issue, and he could be himself. He could be a different self, and the possibility of that is something that was very intoxicating for him. And again, could have been a different life, a different Flint. So what
utopias are very exciting.
What would Flint have been if he was allowed that, but also at the same time became a very influential and powerful person, and somebody who was a great leader, a great commander? What could that future have been? And that's one of those things you have to ask yourself when you're playing a part of those possibilities of somebody, because they are elements of that person. They may have been negated or thwarted or redirected, but they are possibilities in a different world. That person could have been that. And it's an element of him. Yes, he does have, he is idealistic underneath all of that. And I think that continues in him. There are glimmers of that. Like you were saying about the Maroon camp and the slaves. And that's still part of him and still in there,
He has moments of it. Okay, so this segues beautifully into my super nerdy question. This is my thing that I've been focusing on. I think it hit me at some point when we were podcasting, and then I've never let go. Okay, so Flint. Sorry, I need a lot of preface to this question. So Flint is a great storyteller, great orator, all of this, very good at swaying people in the direction he wants. Yes, he knows this. Everyone knows this about him. I love that. Like, that stuff's really exciting. But I feel like there is possibly this other side of Flint when he's storytelling. And I'll give you examples of where I see it, where he usually starts out with his deliberate swaying of people and his using his skills as a storyteller, and then every once in a while he seems to slip into this other place where he motivates people, but in a way I feel like possibly he doesn't even realize he's doing it. Like that there's right after Flint had the big speech with the Queen, and then Flint says to Silver, "Thank you for opening that door." That became the shorthand for what I call it, is that there are these moments where Flint opens doors for other characters to take a new direction that in my mind is like Flint almost allowing them to find the place they were supposed to go, like find some inner spark in themselves. And so that might tie into your idea that like, deep down he still has that. So the first one is the Odysseus speech. Like the first one, like Eleanor had already been talking about wanting to change Nassau, to make Nassau become something new and different. And she's doing her Eleanor thing up until the moment when Flint, like first he starts with the whole Urca and like, I've got this plan that we already seen him use on Richard. But when she says, but why here? Like, why don't you just go away? And then something in your performance shifted at that moment. And when he's talking about the Odysseus part, I never know if I should say you or he in these situations, but something you did with him in that moment for someone like me who looks way too closely at this show is that your attitude changed, and he went from like kind of what we knew as his script that he uses to something way more internal feeling. And I'll give you the other two examples, and then I'll ask the real question. And the second time, the second time I already brought up the "where else would you matter" with Silver, like that it just feels like Flint was using words that are important to Flint, and it ended up triggering Silver in a way that took Silver down that road of becoming truly part of the crew and making this huge sacrifice and kind of becoming who Silver possibly was meant to be. Because he had pretended to not be invested in other people, but we learned that he's like super, super invested in other people.
Yeah.
And then the last one is with Vane right before the duel between Flint and Teach.
Yeah.
And Vane's like, dude, this is crazy. What are you doing? Like, we hate all those people. And then you're like, Flint's like, stop thinking about all the things that were important to you, like duty and honor and your promises to people. Who are you?
Yeah.
And that was like kind of the last thing I expected Flint to say, because usually Flint will use exactly the tools he knows will work, which for Vane is duty, is like, his promises to other people. But the who are you was like, I'm freeing you, dude. Like,
yeah.
And it almost felt like it was like the worst words to use, but it ended up being the best words. So now my question is, do you, sorry, this is just, we just got a little like tour through my brain for a second. And now I will actually ask you a question. Do you feel like Flint is always being deliberate in his use of storytelling? Or do you think there are moments where he is tapping into something less intentional, more subconscious, that might be something inside of him that sparks things in others?
Yeah, look, I think he's a great leader, and I think that great leaders are instinctive. I don't think, like anybody who's great at something, it's part of them. It's just instinctive. And I think that also moments of honesty, of real clarity and honesty, are shifting points. They are, like when you just say, when somebody is completely honest with you, that is very, when that happens. And it is something that you can't evade. I mean, complete frankness and honesty, when that's dropped into something, it is a point where you have to move, you have to take it on, and you have to, and I think that so it's a combination of the fact that he is a great leader, and he just instinctively knows how to sort of manipulate people but how to say something that will completely shift that person's, because that's what he wants to do. He wants to shift that person's point of view. But it's a moment of, like, for example, with the teach thing, he knows he knows he's going to lose. I mean, he knows he's going to lose.
That's exactly what we said. We were like, look at this guy. Look at this guy.
Yeah. And he's half-starved. He's exhausted. Right. There's no way he's going to be able to.
Ray Stevenson is giant.
Yes, exactly, enormous. So it was not one of those moments where it's like he just goes, "What have I got to lose? I'm just going to give it to you totally straight." And it's just this kind of the genius of Flint is that he says the right thing at the right time to get that person. And he doesn't understand it necessarily. It's just instinctive. But I think that those are moments of absolute honesty. And I think that Flint has those moments throughout where, because I think rather like Coriolanus, I don't think he finds it easy to lie. I think he's very honest. In a way, and those moments of total honesty and clarity are kind of those shifting points where he kind of puts it on the other person, but it's just the perfectly timed to move that person into a different headspace.
It is just a very striking. I don't know. I mean, it sounds like this kind of fits in with your overall thing, that there wasn't like moments where you were like, okay, we're going to shift gears and this is what Flint is doing. But it comes across as this very, I mean, again, like kind of elemental, like the same way that the whole story is implying that Flint is, or Silver's implying, but Silver and the story are implying that Flint can control the weather. The story is also implying that Flint at certain moments can not just convince people, but actually change them, which is fascinating.
Yeah, well, I think yes, he does. I think he does change people. I think he makes, to a certain extent, he makes Silver who he is.
Or he brings out the person Silver was supposed to be.
Yeah, and also Vane becomes somebody who becomes this epic hero.
Yep. In a different way, right?
Yeah, in a different way. But it's sort of that shifting of Vane happens through Flint in a way. That he moves him on to something else. So yeah.
I mean, I think you could argue that each time he imbues the other people with the meaning that their lives were kind of circling around, but that they ended up kind of getting concentrated in that place that they needed to be.
I suppose Flint is also somebody who came from nothing and ends up being this
really meaningful person.
Yes, exactly. And the thing is that also these other people kind of like they're living these sort of, to certain people would see it as a squalid life in this corner of the Caribbean, but yet they become these heroic, epic people, and I suppose that's, that he infects them with that kind of thing.
Infects, very good word usage. That's great. I love that.
There's one thing that I find, so I've had a number of people ask me, so what do you think happens at the end? All I want to say is, I think that it's totally up to the audience. It's very important that it is up to them, because, when I'm not the carrier of the truth of this series, and neither in a way is John, it becomes, by that point, it becomes everybody else's story. And you need to, and I think John deliberately wanted to do that, is say, look, it's yours. You answer it. You can believe what you want to believe, and you must, because that's important to you. Because I've said what my opinion is, and I've seen people kind of being very upset about it. And I'm like, look, this is just my opinion,
right?
Because it's not defined what happens. It's open. It's deliberately meant to be that. so it must be that for people. And I feel very badly that I said my opinion about it, because I could tell that it was really upset some people. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
No, I'm really glad I was going to say something like that in the beginning of the episode without you, so I can say my piece here, because I know a lot of people likely had a lot of expectations about me trying to pin you down to all sorts of opinions about the show. And you and I had emailed before we start that it was very important to both of us to leave Flint in a place where he could still inhabit people's interpretations of him and of the story. And I've said this many times on the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, and I really, I was like, after I said I was, oh God, I wish I hadn't said that. I also have another fantasy, which I will leave you with, which is, I had another fantasy that, actually, in the end, he does become a general or some commander in the American Revolution later on under another name.
When he's when he becomes a time traveler, he'll do that. And
no, he's like this ancient commander who's still got it. You know?
So old.
Yeah, that would be great.
Art is best when it can be interpreted by the viewer, and we all get to have this beautiful thing forever that you all made that will be meaningful for different people at different times, meaningful for the same person at different points in their lives, depending on where they are.
And the audience has ownership of it. It's not just exclusively us who are in it. We have,
y'all are done with your part. You can only be audience yourselves now.
I know. And you guys, and that's as it should be.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I agree completely. That's not me trying to but we disagreed here. I think that's the amazing thing about this story, is that it allows so many people to see it in so many ways, and that means that it gets to be meaningful for so many people in so many ways.
Absolutely, and I think what I'm afraid of, and what I felt that perhaps I did in that example, was that somehow you diminish it for people, and I do not want to do that. I want to leave it open for people, because it has so many layers and nuances, and there's so much to find in it. And I want people to enjoy it that way. And I don't want to suddenly just sort of go, this is what it is. Right.
Well, you are allowed your interpretation as well, obviously.
Exactly.
But that doesn't become
there wouldn't
canon.
Have been,
right.
Exactly.
Exactly. That's what I wanted to say, is that your interpretation of Flint as we receive it in the text, not anything you say outside of the text, but your interpretation of Flint as received by us in the text is what made him so meaningful. I mean, John had a part too, but whatever,
Oh my God, yeah.
I'm talking. I've already said my stuff to him, but I'm talking to you right now, so you get credit.
I mean, the thing is that that's always something for me as well. Is I ended up being the face of Flint and the kind of, but he really created the mind. I mean, what John achieved in Black Sails really is
incredible.
Really incredible. And I have nothing but admiration for him.
Yeah, I mean, it's my favorite story of them all.
Yeah.
And I'm not alone, and it's very beautiful. And thank you so much for this beautiful portrayal.
An absolute pleasure.
Thank you for coming on the podcast. Thank you for all the twitchiness in your face that we've enjoyed so much. I was going to make a joke about facing Flint. That was in Luke's first interview. He talked about how everyone would talk about facing Flint, but you're not scary at all. You're not Flint. So I get no credit for facing Flint.
What's great is I have fans come up. I mean, fans, and one of the great things about Black Sails fans is they are so full on. It's not like they're going, I watched that show. It's kind of fun. We really enjoyed that. They're like, oh man, I love that show. Oh man, I can't believe I'm actually standing here.
I love Black Sails fans.
And the thing is, what's hilarious is then I start talking to them, and they're like, I can see in their face going, oh my God,
that's not Flint.
this guy just got this, and they're like, I'm going to get out of here because this guy's really killing my dreams.
Oh, Toby, you're
anyway.
destined to be not Flint for the rest of your life.
I am. This is the great fantasy of actually being that cool. Oh God. Anyway,
it was
we
such
can
a
but
pleasure.
dream.
Yeah,
it's a pleasure to meet you. Finally,
so
I've
nice
heard a
to
lot
meet you.
about you, and thank you very much for doing all you do to
obsessively talk about the show.
Yeah, and also but just to give a forum. To give a forum for this show as well, because it's great that people talk about it and that they love it so much, and it means an enormous amount to me, and I know to everybody else who's involved in it.
It is incredibly deserving of that.
Well, look, it's great to talk to you, and maybe we'll do it again some other time.
All right, thanks so much. Oh, wait!
All
Talk
right.
about your other stuff. Talk about probably everyone listening to this knows about Lost in Space, but you are currently...
I'm doing another season of that. We're about halfway through, and that's very exciting. It is actually really genuinely very exciting. I love working on it, and I love all the other actors. Again, it's just such another great group of people.
It's been a lot of fun.
It's really fun, and it's just... now, it just gets better all the time. They've got some great ideas and they've got some great stuff coming up in it. So I'm really enjoying that. And then I've done this, hopefully what will be a really interesting series for the BBC called Summer of Rockets, which is by a kind of very distinctive British auteur called Stephen Polyakov, who does, he's done...
Neat.
Yeah, some really interesting projects on TV, and it's a really interesting, it's almost autobiographical about his father and grandfather, who were Jewish Russian emigres who came over to England just after the revolution and set up an electronics firm that specialized in deaf aids and other kind of products, one of which was the paging device.
Oh, wow.
They were the first people to invent a pager, but it didn't really cotton on in England because the professional classes were too snobby to be rung like servants. They saw it as being run like a servant.
But we Americans love that
shit. But it made somebody... Anyway, it's sort of based on that, but it's also conflated into kind of what the current struggles are in the UK about immigration and about our own identity and all of that stuff. And it's a really interesting piece that I did all summer long, but which really
wonderful.
was yeah, it should be really interesting.
All right. I will keep everyone posted on Twitter. Hopefully that's coming to the US too. We'll find out. You will? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like our listeners know even better what you have been in than I, but I realized today that the first thing I ever saw you in was Possession, which is an adaptation of one of my favorite books.
Oh, yeah. A.S. Byatt. Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. She's so good.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Well, that
I know.
was a long time ago.
That was a long time ago. All right. Thank you so much.
Lovely to meet you finally.
I hope the rest of your shoot goes well for Lost in Space, because in my family, we're really looking forward to seeing it.
Well, I hope you enjoy it when you get there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Deep is a Common Room radio production. For more information and access to other programs, please visit us at commonroomradio.com. To show your support, pledges of as little as $1 a month can be made to patreon.com/commonroomradio. Join the conversation by using the hashtag FathomsDeep and follow us on Twitter at BlackSalesCast. We ask that you keep your tweets respectful and positive, and please avoid spoilers. If you have more to say, we want to hear it in all its spoiler glory. Email us at podcast@commonroomradio.com with Fathoms Deep in the subject line. Thanks for listening.